coming, calling, we're our temples, pray as one. I believe in the word of wonder and a kingdom for the...
This is Larry Pollock coming to you from Underground Performance Gym Podcast. I'm here with Dominick Mutascio, and he's a top prep coach in the bodybuilding industry. And today we're going to be talking about coaching and different protocols that we're seeing and trends in the industry right now. Just to give you a little bit of background, Dominick's been doing this for a long time. How many years?
Now, I mean, roughly, I've been a dietitian for 16 years and been like a prep coach probably about 14, 15 years as well.
And he works at a clinic out in Las Vegas, right?
Yeah, so I work part-time at a preventative and anti-aging clinic here in Las Vegas. And, I only work there 1 or 2 days a week. And then my primary occupation is a functional health coach and contest prep coach.
And Dominick's actually prepped a lot of top competitors, including like Nick. He worked with Nick Walker. More recently, what was his name? The new kid?
Elliot. So Elliot works. Elliot works with my good friend. He works with Dom Cardone, which a lot of people get me and Dom Cardone confused. But Dom Cardone's a good friend of mine. Like, we're both from New York, so we're in pretty close contact. So he explained to me a little bit about that situation too, and it's something that is quite common, unfortunately, that we're seeing more and more in this day and age of bodybuilding. And I've seen it too with tons of people. It's not just on the elite level. It's actually happens more often on the amateur level when people are, trying to chase either, a pro card or, just even some of these local shows where, genetics plays a huge role into this. And a lot of times, people become very often delusional where they get caught like in this hamster wheel that kind of takes them away and gives them a false sense of reality. And then, they result to these extremes that, put other aspects of their life and health in jeopardy.
Well, just to put things in perspective, I started competing when I was 16 years old back in the 80s. And I won many contests back then, including the Continental USA when I was 18.
Wow.
And I prepped my first client when I was 19 years old. And there was no title of a prep coach. The guy just came to me in the gym. He knew I won shows, and he asked me to train him for the Mr. Las Vegas contest. And so I kind of basically had him do what I was doing because that's what we knew back in the day.
Yeah.
Not that it was all perfect or correct, but it worked. And he went there and won his show. And I've sort of done this on and off for, like over 40 years. And I say on and off because I've never been like a full-time coach because I never wanted to like be dependent on that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I've always ran other businesses. Like right now I own a gym, and that's my primary income. So even this YouTube channel is like a hobby on the side because I'm not going to depend on it to make a living.
Yeah.
So, but I do take on clients, and I've done it for like over the years, and I've never looked for clients or sought out clients as people come to me in the gym or wherever. And lately more people have been reaching out online.
Mm-hmm.
And if I feel like it's a good fit, and I can help them, then I will. I prepped a kid last year, not a kid, he's an older guy, masters competitor actually. And he did really, really well. But I'm seeing a new trend lately. And just to give you an example, a kid in my gym came to me maybe 3-4 weeks ago, and he's only been training for 2 years. And he really doesn't know anything about training or nutrition. He got some coach who won his first contest like recently, like maybe last year. So
Yep.
the guy's won his first contest, a local show, and now he's a prep coach. So this kid, his first cycle was like a TRT dosage of testosterone, which is reasonable. But his second cycle was, I think he had like 800 milligrams of, no, I'm sorry. It was 1,000 milligrams of test and 700 milligrams of trenbolone and one Anadol a day. And this kid has no concept of training or nutrition. And like, this is we're looking like 2 grams of liquid
Yeah.
compounds, and he does no muscle on him. I mean, not really. And so I told him basically, he came to me, and first we got his blood work done, and honestly, it was really bad. His hemoglobin hematocrit was really high. His cholesterol was high. His triglycerides were high. I mean, this kid's like 24 years old and barely
What you're
hasn't even.
describing, I've seen, unfortunately, hundreds of identical situations just like what you're describing. It's sad, and social media is also another thing that has been both good and also horrible for our industry, where it opens up an additional platform for people to go ahead, and they see a target audience that they can make money off of. And this same kind of concept applies also not only in the competitive realm, but I also see it in like functional and preventative medicine all the time, with like these functional and preventative clinics that offer different services, say for people that have like Lyme's disease or autoimmune, different autoimmune diseases, that they know that people are desperate, and the people that have money, and these people don't know any better, so they kind of leech off of them, and then it starts like this whole downhill like spiral, which before anyone even considers using PEDs, they should be impeccable with their diet and their training for a certain time frame, and reach their natural potential. They go ahead and even consider doing something like that, not only from a health perspective, but also from a progress standpoint too, because if you have someone and they are taking everything under the sun right off the bat, like that person's really not gonna is only gonna reach a certain potential at a certain point, and then it's gonna be very hard for them to progress if they're doing it
Well,
that
as
way.
I mentioned, this kid I've talked about that was put on this big cycle. He actually put on 20 pounds on this cycle, like within a few months.
Oh, of course he
But
would.
but as
Hmm.
soon as he stopped doing it, it all went away
Hmm.
because he doesn't even know how to train or eat.
Yeah. Hmm.
So there's just no reason for something like that. And anyways, he asked me to work with him. So the first thing I told him to do is you're going to get off everything. We re got did the blood work after he's been off now for about a month, and luckily his hematocrit hemoglobin went down right away. His triglycerides cholesterol went down right away, which is a good thing because they didn't do permanent damage, hopefully. Um, and now I told him, you need to train natural. We're going to do like a TRT with some clomiphene and HCG. And then I said, you need to train natural for like another year just to learn how to train and eat before we even consider any PEDs. Because he
Yeah.
literally has no clue what to do in the gym or anything about nutrition. And like I said, he's only been training for 2 years,
Yeah.
just not ready for that.
And another thing too, that like I've been specializing in this for years, but another thing that not a lot of coaches ask, you know, um, these younger guys that are coming on board is potentially having children in the future something that would ever be a concern to you, even if it's not something that's within the next year or two, even if it's 6 to 8 years down the road. Well, how you go about your programming with your PEDs and whatnot can heavily dictate that. Doing certain things, and incorporating different ganotropins, so that you're re-stimulating both the gonads, which are the testicles, and the hypothalamus and pituitary. Um, which, a lot of them don't take that in consideration. When I coach someone, I tell people, and I'm sure, Larry, that you've seen this hundreds of times, that, when you're 28 years old, 30 years old, whatever, you're not thinking about, you're fixated more on the short-term gratification. You're not even thinking about 2 years down the road, let alone, 8 to 10 years down the road. So I tell them that, as I get to, know that individual better, that I try to go ahead and think for them logically, like what this person may want, in the future. I have a handful of guys I've been working with for, over 8 to 10 years. Like one of them is my close client, like Vincenzo Mazzone. He's a big super heavyweight. Started working with him when he was like 19 or 20. And that was like one of the first questions I asked him was about kids. And he's like, well, I know I don't want to like right now, but I knew down the road that he would want to. So, over the years, there are certain things that I've done with his programming to make that possible. Where now, he has a beautiful daughter and he's going to be having another child. And that's because of what we were doing, throughout the time frame that we were together. And now that doesn't mean that it's going to negatively impact his progress. No, it's just that, when I tell people with coaching, there's 100 ways that you can get from point A to point B and get the same desired like outcome and goal. Now, how you go about that though, you want to be able to get from point A to point B with one, putting the least amount of risks on your health, and any other things that are going to negatively impact your life. And, this could go into really grave detail in terms of like priming their metabolism so that, when they're in prep, you're metabolically in the most sound place that you're able to get into that next level condition without having to, be in a crazy deficit and do all these extremes to do so. So, that's why, like with coaching for bodybuilding, there's a lot that goes into this because we're not in like a sport like where it's, like baseball or football. We're in the one sport in the world that there is no rules. Now, when you get on stage, the judges don't care if this guy was eating McDonald's and Taco Bell and the other guy was eating, tilapia and asparagus their whole prep. And, this guy was injecting motor oil in his, whatever it may be. Whoever, looks their best on stage wins, which is something that I like love about the sport, but it could be very dangerous at the same time.
Well, just to give you some perspective, like when I started, like I said, I did my first show when I was 16, and I did my first cycle at 16, which is pretty young. But I had been training since I was 12. And when I say training, I was training really hard with pro bodybuilders. So I
Yeah.
already had 4 years of serious training and nutrition under my belt. I
Hmm.
wasn't messing around back then. But my first cycle was, I've told this before, I had Cyril Anavar 2.5 milligrams, and I had one bottle of it. I took 3 a day. So
Yeah.
that was like, what is that?
7.5.
7.5 milligrams a day.
Yeah.
And I got amazing results from that on, my first cycle ever. And I got drastic. I think all my lifts went up like 20 pounds while I was dieting for show
Yep.
because my receptors were fresh and, I had never taken anything before. But even after that, I went on to do more heavier cycles with Trembolone and other things. But I think back then, like we took, you know, 300 milligrams a week. And
Yeah.
that's because that's what we knew. It wasn't that you know, we never thought about taking grams. It just wasn't a thing in the 80s. We were all, I think we were all kind of scared of it, because we didn't really know it was new and there was nobody
Of
to
course.
really ask other than like bros in the gym.
Of course.
And, like this, if you look at like Lee Haney or Gasperi, because I trained with them back in the 80s, or Mike Menser was my roommate.
Oh, wow.
Like when I trained with Mike Menser when I was 19, we took NPP 300 milligrams 3 times a
Yeah.
week. That was our whole cycle. And training with him, I was at 19, about 235 pounds.
Wow.
and you know, squatting 600 for reps, benching 400 for reps, not no world record, but I was good size. And I remember Boston Lloyd came to me when he was still a teenager, and he was taking like all kinds of stuff. And I'm looking at him, I'm like, you know, when I was your age, I was way bigger than you, and I took like a fraction of what you take.
Yep. And I'll tell you, it's funny too that you bring up Boston. I will say something like, in his regard, I became very close with Boston like the last 6 years that he was alive. And I will tell you, I wouldn't be probably the coach that I am today if it wasn't for Boston. So for a number of reasons, like I'm a big science and research guy. So like I take, what I've learned from the years of working in the medical field and then also like being a competitive bodybuilder. However, with what we are doing as bodybuilders, like pushing non-physiological hormone ranges, there is no clinical data that is really on those types of things. When people reference different studies and stuff like that, you can't really apply them to what we are doing, with non-physiological hormonal ranges because these tests are done like if you have a case study that was done on MK677, that was a rodent study or whatever it may be, they're dosing it to them in like 2 to 5 milligrams, which in this day and age in bodybuilding, people don't use stuff that way. So when Boston was alive and he was going through all of his issues with his kidneys, I tried giving him the best advice, but Boston was very against traditional medicine. Like I told him, listen, like you need to go for dialysis, and he was against that. He was on a list to try to wait for a donor for a kidney donor, but with Boston, you can tell him one thing would go in one
Oh,
year out
we
the
have
other.
this discussion almost on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And it was just like one ear out of the other. He
So like
disappears.
with him, I was so blessed because I have a list of all of his blood work, the last like 4 to 5 years that he was alive. And what I did was I put it in my computer and the cycles that he was on, I would cross reference that to his blood work. And if Boston was alive today and towards the end of his life, he did start to come out and preach this more that, for an example, like if he was taking, say, 350 milligrams of tren opposed to he had a time frame that he ran it anywhere at one point from 1200 to 1500 milligrams a week, which is absolutely insane. However, when you look at in terms of his body's response, he actually responded better doing the lower dose because at a certain point, all it's doing is creating additional stress in the body and toxicity in the body and going to actually hinder your progress. And I know Boston, if he was alive today, that was the thing that he was really preaching. When he was younger, he went with the mindset like, oh, I think, if I take just the more I take, the better. But he learned over his life. And that's why I like to reference him a lot because I feel like he dedicated and sacrificed his life and his body to literally to bodybuilding and showing people like, this is what you don't do. And the saddest part is that there are too many guys that are worried about, what's the best cycle, this dose. No one's ever talking about like training, which I'll tell you straight up from years of doing this. And it took some time to an experience to really see this. They don't teach you this in a classroom, that your training is one of the main dictators of how much tissue you're going to put on. If you're performing better in the gym and basic progressive overload, then it's going to translate to your physique. But typically, when you speak to a new guy that's getting into competing, that's typically the last thing that they're going to ask you.
I want to touch on that because, like when I started, our primary emphasis was on training.
Yeah.
I mean, I would train with Mike Menser, and it was all about the training. And the drugs weren't even illegal, but we looked at them as like supplements, like vitamins.
And as they should be. Yeah.
And we figured this like would help recover from the training is what it does.
Mhm.
We didn't look at it as this is the be all end all. And I don't want to put some people on blast, so I'm not going to name names, but I'm going to tell you like this. There's a group of coaches right now that are big on YouTube, and they're straight out telling people that the training doesn't matter. It's just the drugs. And they're pushing huge dosages. And one of these people has a huge YouTube following and does all these scientific studies and talks about them. And he sounds very knowledgeable, and he sounds, you know, he puts out a lot of information. Some of it's good, some not. But recently, I was we're doing something with T and Clark talking about um, insulin and IGF-1 and things like that. And I saw in preparation for that interview with T and Clark, I watched the interview that this guy did with T and Clark, and he said that IGF-1 makes you more insulin sensitive, which that's totally wrong. IGF-1 makes you
It's actually the opposite, to be
it's
quite
completely the opposite. And I told him at the Olympia, I said, you know, you said on a podcast that IGF-1
honest.
makes
And Larry, who said this?
a very famous YouTube person
Mhm.
who like I said, I don't want to put him on blast, but
Yeah.
because everybody's gonna know who he is.
Mhm.
But you know, he said, I'll just say it, vigorous Steve.
Yeah.
And so he said, and I told him at the Olympia, I went up to him, I said, hey, you know, IGF-1 does not make you insulin sensitive. It makes you insulin resistant.
That's correct.
So like, and I knew this from personal experience, not just from reading or anything. And the reason
Mhm.
I knew this is because I actually early 2000s, I was working with Natural Somebody, and I got a hold of some like real IGF-1, and I took it, and it for the first 3 days, I thought it was amazing. I was super hungry, and I was full as a house, and I was eating like contest prep food, but lots of it, and I was super vascular, pumped, everything for about 3 days, and then all of a sudden, I couldn't eat, and I
Yep.
ended up going to the doctor, to a
That's the first
gastroenterologist.
sign to Larry. That's the first sign. I tell people this, and I do like a mentoring program for other coaches, and I tell them the first thing where someone's like, I'm losing my appetite, I tell them right off the bat, the first thing that you have to do is check their fasting blood glucose, and then check their blood sugar again 2 hours after any carbon protein meal, because it's usually an indicator that you're becoming insulin resistant if your appetite's dropping.
Well, anyways, I went to the gastroenterologist. He was gonna look down my throat with a scope, and when he went to do it, I puked up undigested food all over him. He wasn't happy with that.
Yeah.
I had only been taking the IGF-1 for 3 or 4 days, and that happened
Interesting. Interesting.
that quick. It just shut me down. Like I couldn't. I was eating all this food, but it was just backing up in my system. I couldn't digest it.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I'm big on with people, that it doesn't matter necessarily how much food you're taking in, how much food can your body absorb and actually utilize.
Right. And a lot of people, they just don't understand that GH makes you insulin resistant, IGF-1 makes you insulin resistant,
100%.
and I believe that was I did a video on it. I think that's what happened to Nick Walker, honestly, in his last contest prep.
So like in regards to that and like insulin sensitivity, so it is like probably the most important thing, and it also is super important in terms of it's the number one cause of cardiovascular disease, because when we run high blood glucose, um, it can potentially penetrate something called the endothelium, which the best way I could describe that is it's a protective coating, these endothelium cells, that wraps around all of like your arteries, your cardiovascular tissue, that's similar to like a Teflon, the coating of like a Teflon pan. And there's only certain things that can penetrate that wall. The number one thing is elevated, like is blood sugar. So people that are diabetics, that's why they are the most prone to cardiovascular disease, and then other things like C-reactive protein and high inflammation is second, and then maybe third or fourth would actually be like your lipids. But like in bodybuilding, it's one of the most important things, to keep you progressing, and also health wise, that a lot of people develop these issues because they're they're taking growth hormone at these high doses and usually splitting it up all throughout the day, which that's fine. But the problem is that they're not taking days off from taking it. So, then their body does end up becoming like insulin resistant. That's why insulin works very well with growth hormone. They work synergistically. And then you have other coaches that are just see a protocol that someone does and utilizes things like metformin, um, or other different pre-diabetic types of medications or different peptides, and they have no idea how these things work, like on a cellular level. Like where I've seen people where they're taking higher doses of metformin, but they've never once checked their blood sugar. And people don't realize, yes, metformin is something that can be utilized the right way. But if you're having someone take it that doesn't have issues with like insulin resistance or their blood glucose, um, metformin actually inhibits and blunts mTOR and IGF, which your mTOR essentially is like a light switch for protein synthesis. So I've seen people before that were on PEDs, but they were taking tons of metformin, had no insulin resistant issues, and they end up losing muscle because of this, because these things are very individual based, and people don't understand that. There's too many people, like you said, that do one show and say they won a show, and they take their protocol that they were doing that and apply it to someone else. But in what we do, it doesn't work like that. And like you can run into these types of cases all the time.
Well, just to give you an example, like through all my years of competing, I think my average contest prep dose was like around 1,500 milligrams, and that's the highest, right before show.
And you don't need any more than that. And I'll tell you, if you doubled that dose, you wouldn't have looked any better whatsoever. But you would have. The only thing that would have changed were the side effects that you were experiencing.
Well, let me tell you what happened. I actually competed in a show, and there was an Italian guy that competed with me in the light heavyweight. He was pretty jacked, and he was visiting from Italy. And apparently, the Europeans at the time pushed higher dosages, and I never heard of like taking grams, but he started training with me right after the show. And he told me the secret was to take like 6 grams of testosterone a week. And, I had never heard of such a thing, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to try this. And I don't know how many grams I got up to, maybe 3 or 4 grams. But all I know is after 2 or 3 weeks, all I felt was sick,
Mhm.
lethargic, and I wasn't getting any stronger. I was just holding a bunch of water. And I realized right away, like, this is not working for me.
Yeah.
And so I went back to my normal protocols, which was the low dosages. And all the people that I've trained, I've 99% of them, I've taken what they're taking and cut it in half or less, and they got drastically better results.
Absolutely. I completely 100% agree, that you don't need to be taking these crazy dosages, and then all you end up doing is you're preventing your body, you're frying out your androgen receptors. And another thing too, like a study that gets thrown around that like drives me crazy, is there are some people that are pretty well respected prep coaches that tries to preach and say that, that if you take more PEDs, that your androgen receptors are going to respond better. That when you pretty much either come off or you have a recomp phase, that's doing nothing, which is totally, totally, completely false. I know the study that they're referring to, and that could be a whole podcast on its own. But I can assure you that that is not true. And if that was the case, then then how many people, when the first cycle they take, no matter what, they're always going to see a really, really good response. And that's because their androgen receptors are so sensitive. Now, when you have different times, what I call recomposition phases, where and those phases could be altered depending on the person. If it's a younger guy in his early 20s, mid 20s, a lot of those guys, I will take them off of completely testosterone for an extended period of time, especially if fertility is a priority. Because when you do that, yes, you go through a phase where you're essentially starving the androgen receptors. It's something similar almost to like autophagy, but when you starve the androgen receptors, what ends up happening is the body starts to build new receptors so that when you go back on, you get an optimal response. But there are some people that believe that if you just, continue to run things at higher doses, that's not going to affect the way your body responds either, which I mean, you could attest to this that that's not the case.
No, actually, there's a very famous powerlifter who I trained with for a number of years. And I know exactly what he took because he got it from me. This was
Yeah.
back in early 2000s when I actually was running a gear lab. And he got it from me and I trained with him. He was my training partner at that time. And he actually held the world record in uh, raw bench and also with his shirt with equipped at the same time, which I don't think anybody else has ever done. And he was a world record holder at the time for probably like a decade. And 1 week before he broke the raw record, we added up everything he was taking. And he was taking four compounds. It was testosterone, trembolone, anadrol, and D-ball. And I added it up. We sat there and added it all. He didn't even know what he was taking, but we added it all up. It was 10 grams in a
Wow.
week. 10 grams in 1 week. But here's the thing that people hear that they think he broke a world record. He did 10 grams in a week. But what they don't know is he worked up to that over a period of months. And as soon as he did the world record, he went completely off for like 4 months. Everything, just cold turkey.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the 10 grams was really necessary. Obviously, he broke a world record, and he was at that time, he was probably one of the largest individuals I've ever seen in my life, as far as just like size.
Yeah.
The guy was, I think, 6'1" and weighed like 340 pounds, and just was built like a refrigerator.
Yeah.
Um,
But you did say that he would come off though, right? Yep.
completely off for like 4 or 5 months
Yeah.
right
And I mean,
after.
and Larry, I mean, I'm sure you probably know this too, but Ronnie Coleman, when he was in his heyday, he would take 3 months where he would come completely off of everything. He would kind of like get out of like his traditional bodybuilding structure for like 3 months, and then after that, then he would be 100% regimented and go back to what he was doing. But I think that greatly benefited his progress in his bodybuilding career, and also to like people like Ronnie and Kai Green and a couple others I know that actually, from what I understand, turned pro naturally. So if people
Yeah, they
see
already had it.
like their progression over the years, they did it the right way where they reached their natural potential, and then they started going to the next level and introducing PEDs. If they would have went ahead, I can guarantee you this. If they would have went ahead the first year that they started competing and started using steroids, you would have not seen. They would have never been able to reach the point that they were able to get to, and
Right.
that's the problem in this generation right now. People that are competing 1 or 2 years want to go ahead, are impatient, and they just skip everything and go to like what Ronnie was taking his last 2 or 3 years that he was winning Olympia titles, and think that they're gonna.
I want to touch on something that people say steroids are not addictive,
Oh,
but
they definitely
psychologically they are addictive. And
100%.
because what people think is, I'm taking certain XYZ and I'm this size and strength and making some kind of gains, and I need to keep doing this. And I actually thought that too. When, I started, like I said, as a teenager, but when I was 20 years old, I got in a lot of trouble. And that's another story I've already told. And
I've heard bits and pieces of it. It's
I ended
pretty
up going to prison for
yeah.
almost 6 years. And yeah, initially I was in the LA County jail for 14 months, and there was no weights and no food, starving to death. So I lost a tremendous amount of weight and size. But when I actually got to Corcoran, the actual prison where they had weights and food, I started back training again. And every year there, I won all the powerlifting competitions. They had a once a year a Christian thing would bring in a powerlifting meet for the inmates, and I was like 230 pounds the whole time I was there, just eating food and training, and I had no PEDs,
Yeah.
and I was basically eating just a lot of prison food. And back then, I'd get cans of tuna and whatever I could get from the commissary, and that and extra food out of the kitchen, and just training and eating and sleeping.
Yeah.
And I maintained that for that whole time. I was
Yeah.
squatting 600, benching 400, deadlifting over 600.
Yeah.
My weight was around 230 pounds at the time.
Yeah.
And that was off, completely off of everything for years.
Yeah.
So I learned that, it's the training and nutrition that really matters more.
Were you surprised by that at the time, like how much you were able to hold on to and like put on like without any PEDs?
Okay, let me tell you this. I wasn't, because back in when I started, again, PEDs were not the emphasis. I always thought it was the training and nutrition, and they were just like extra add on.
Yeah.
What did surprise me was later, um, when Operation Raw Deal came down, and at that time I had gotten up to like 250 pounds, and my dosages were a little bit higher, but not crazy. I mean, maybe 12 to 1500 milligrams. And I ended up having to take a deal for 14 months and go into Terminal Island. And I went there, and they actually gave me testosterone in there. My TRT dosage was 200 milligrams a week. But I thought going in there that, I was going to lose a lot of size and strength. Well, on 200 milligrams a week, I was there for 14 months. I didn't lose any size or any strength the whole time I was there.
Yeah.
I kept everything, but I was training hard. They had, full weights there and everything, and I was getting plenty of food and plenty of sleep.
Yeah.
But I actually surprised myself that I didn't lose anything
Yeah.
at all.
And Larry, it's funny that you bring that up. So like I haven't competed now in more than like what was it, 2000? Yeah. So it's been over like 5 years. And I will tell you that I was very surprised by this. If you would have asked me some of these questions, say 7 or 8 years ago, I probably would have had different answers. But I've learned more to and experienced more from not competing, um, because I've been very surprised by how much muscle tissue I've been able to hold, not taking anything outside of 180 milligrams of test every 5 days, and I do 3 IUs of growth every other day, and I've been pretty blown away with, you know, I've held on to at least 96% of 95% of all the tissue that, I previously had. And I've done like a handful of microdose experiments, like with a little bit of primo and doing things in like the smallest microdose setting. And I've gotten to the point even about a year and a half ago where I could have probably got on stage and would have definitely been top 3 or 4 in any national show doing it this way. And what I noticed was the biggest dictator of how much tissue and fullness that I would hold on to. Like as a dietitian, like I'll usually set someone's, I call it their basal metabolic rate, kind of find out what their maintenance calories are, where their metabolism is. And I believe that there's no difference with your training. So for me, I identified on certain compound movements, like one for me was a squat. So essentially I have a rule of thumb. If I make sure that I go at least every 14 days that I squat 405 for 10 reps. And let's say on my incline, like dumbbells, I do like 125-pound dumbbells for 10 or 12. And on certain compound movements, I have like a certain baseline where if I'm able to maintain those performance markers in the gym, it does not matter at all. Really, like the PEDs that I just on my 180 milligrams of test a week, and I'm able to maintain the same size and the same fullness. And I'll tell you, I was pretty blown away by experiencing that because I would have thought if you would have asked me this a couple of like 7 or 8 years ago, I might have had a different answer.
Well, just to give you an idea, I'm 58 years old right now, and I'm still training just as hard as ever, 4 days a week, high
Yeah.
intensity, like I've always done. I can still squat 600 for reps.
Wow, that's crazy.
I can't bench a lot of weight because I have a shoulder injury, but I can press on the machines.
Yeah.
And my protocol for the last several years has been 200 milligrams of tests a week and 200 milligrams of NPP. And the reason I use the NPP is honestly, it just really helps my joints because at
Of
my
course.
age, with so many years of training, I'm just like beat up.
Yeah.
And I,
We,
I
we
mainly use it just honestly because I'm able to train hard and my joints don't kill me all the time.
Yeah, and we have I sat with like about I don't know 2 months ago a retired like Navy SEAL that he was on hormone replacement therapy. He was also on like recovery peptides, and we a couple months ago prescribed him a low dose of NPP, and he was like in my office almost in like tears of how much it like has helped his life, and he was so grateful for it. So yeah, like it's definitely a huge benefit for certain
And
people.
there's been times when I've experimented, like taking a little bit more, and I actually found that my progress went backwards.
Yeah,
I actually got weaker
yeah.
and smaller. And then when I lowered my dosage, I went back up. And like there's certain compounds like at my age anymore, I have Crohn's as well, that I just can't take that I did when I was young. Like when I was young, I took Anadrol and it
Okay.
worked great for me.
And have Larry, have you had Crohn's? Did you have Crohn's disease when you were a bodybuilder?
So actually, when I was 20 years old, right after I competed in the Teen America, I knew something was wrong because my stomach was distended at the show and I didn't know why.
Mhm.
But I ended up like 3 weeks after that show, I ended up in an emergency room, almost died with ulcerative colitis.
Yeah.
And I had to have my colon completely removed. And I laid in the hospital for several months. And at that point, I just thought bodybuilding was over for me because, I just went through having this major surgery, almost died. And I just didn't think I could do it. But
How old were you at the time you said?
I was 20.
Oh wow. So wait, do you have both Crohn's disease and colitis? I mean, they're
No, I
essentially
had colitis in my
okay.
colon only. And then I had a pull through surgery. They removed my entire colon.
Yeah.
And same thing that Mike Francois got. And anyways, shortly after that, like I said, I went back to training, but I ended up in prison. And when I got out of prison, I really wasn't thinking about competing. I was more focused on working and making money. And I was in John Lloyd, Boston's father's gym, where I was training at the time because it was down the street from my work.
Hmm.
And I was just on a stationary bike, and John said, hey, fat boy. And I've never been fat, so he's just messing with me. But he said, there's this Ironman competition coming up in, a few weeks. They were all training for it. They said, you want to do it? And he was kind of teasing me like I couldn't do it. And I thought to myself, you don't know me. You don't know anything about me. So I jumped in that show with like 6 weeks of prep. And I think I took like fourth or fifth.
And what year was this again?
I want to say that was, let's see, Probably 1999 or 2000.
Okay, so like yeah, 25 years ago, and then
Yeah.
continue, and then
So then I continued competing, and I actually went and I had to qualify for nationals one year, and I think this was like 2004. I was
mhm,
going to compete in nationals in Miami, but I had to do a qualifier, and there was two qualifiers a week before. One was in Mike Francois Classic, I think it was Columbus, Ohio,
yep,
and the other one was like in Miami. And I just chose the Mike Francois Classic because the plane ticket was cheaper. So I went there, and I was probably about 215 pounds shredded, and I got backstage, and Mike Francois, I met him there for the first time. And I told him, I said, I had the same thing as you. I had the colitis. They removed my colon. He goes, how do you do it? I said, I just keep training. And I actually won that show. Um, I wasn't super huge, but for me at 215 pounds in contest shape, I was pretty big.
yeah, and I tell people this all the time. You don't have to be top of the class to win and be successful. I've seen a lot of people win overalls at national shows that are under 200 pounds.
Well, I mean, just saying, like on my frame,
Yeah,
215 pounds is a lot.
yeah. How tall are you?
5'7".
Yeah, that's a good amount for sure.
So yeah, I remember like lots of shows. People have asked me like, how much do you weigh? And I'm like 215, 220. My top weight in competition when I was at my best, I was 225, and I looked huge at
Yeah.
225. Huge
So,
and shredded at 225. Then
uh,
people thought I was 250 or something, but I
oh,
wasn't.
I'm sure it's all like it's all an illusion, at the end of the day. Like most people would look at Keon and never imagine that, he was under 200 pounds at the night show at the Olympia, but he was.
I think
It,
people don't even realize. I think Hadi and Derek probably compete around 225, something around there.
without a doubt. And I know that from a pretty reliable source that they're not anywhere really over like 225, 230 ever. I mean, well, in their off season, yes, but when they're on stage, but it's just because again, like it's an illusion at their height, you know, they're maybe 5'5", 5'6" at the absolute most. But what I was getting at too, like I work with and I have a lot of experience working with people that have autoimmune diseases, colitis, Crohn's disease, which they're essentially the same thing, but one they're just in different places in the intestinal tract. But that opens you up so much more to showing you what stress does to the body and
Oh yeah.
also like running a higher, and I'll tell you part of the reason why too, like if you notice if you go over a certain threshold with PEDs that your body doesn't respond well, it could be related to the autoimmune and how you prep someone that has an autoimmune disease. It has to be done a lot differently than a regular person because what ends up happening, you can't just pound them with cardio and just throw them in a crazy deficit because their body will get to a point where our bodies don't know we're prepping for a bodybuilding show. It's thinking you're in an environment that it needs to survive, so it goes into that survival type mode and their body literally just starts fighting against them. So their preps have to be done like a certain way, and there's different things that you can do too to help minimize any sort of like a Crohn's or colitis flare up. Like some of these oral peptides that they have out are really really good for that. But at the end of the day, it more so breaks down to like how all of your other stuff is like structured. You don't want to have someone that has an autoimmune disease and try to do some sort of crash diet with them that they need to lose 20 pounds of body fat in 6 weeks. That I can assure you that that would be a recipe for disaster. But it teaches you a lot too because the same principles apply for people that have autoimmune diseases to regular people. It's just the people with the autoimmune diseases, they're just way more intensified by like 5 or 10.
So actually, after I had my colon removed, I was perfectly good. I could eat, In and Out Burger, and I had no problems. And I didn't get Crohn's until 2014.
Okay.
And I know I gave myself Crohn's. I What happened was I had to open a gym, and we were waiting to sign a lease on the space, and we finally got the lease signed 2 weeks before the end of the year. so I had 2 weeks. I wanted to be open January 1st. I had 2 weeks to get the gym opened.
Stress is the
And so basically I used Adderall. I worked around the clock moving equipment and setting up this gym. Like I practically didn't sleep for those 2 weeks
yeah.
and was eating just like I had day laborers working with me and I'd buy them lunch at In-N-Out Burger and I'd eat that too because I was just running on speed basically.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even training. I was just working constantly. And right after the gym opened, I went right to heavy training. And 1 week later, I got Crohn's.
Yeah.
I know because I know exactly when it happened. I was driving to LA to meet somebody, and on the way back, all of a sudden I had to like run into the restroom and I was shitting blood.
Yep. And you
And
were having you were having a flare up to where there are
yeah,
open lesions that that need to be yeah. And
and
then
I didn't know what it was, and it actually took over a year to diagnose me because I
what?
was yes, it took a year. I was going to gastroenterologists and different people, and no, I didn't know what it was,
That's
and
insane.
I had no idea what it was. And finally, a gastroenterologist said to me, you might have Crohn's," and he goes, "There's a test for it."
Yeah.
So they did the test, and sure enough, there's a blood test for it, and sure enough, that's what I had.
You see
Um,
stories like that drive me crazy, Larry, because there's easy ways. There's even blood tests that you can do that would indicate Crohn's and colitis. And then usually like if you have a positive, it's an ASCA test. If you have a positive reading on that, then they'll do further testing, but it's usually pretty something easy to diagnose. But it's crazy. And that's why I got away from the traditional health space, because they're again like they're so restricted to how they practice medicine, that the way that they practice medicine is it's more so to not necessarily fix the issue, but to put like retroactive care where they're just putting a band-aid on the issue instead of actually doing things to fix it. Because at the end of the day, if you walked into your doctor and they were able to cure you, they would be out of business,
well,
and
actually, they started me on different biologics, and that didn't work, and different drugs. None of
like
it worked. Um, and I actually figured out I got it in a remission myself. And the main thing was my diet and keeping my stress down.
yep. Stress is the number one thing that causes a flare up.
Yep.
100%.
I,
Yeah.
I got to make sure I get enough sleep every night. And,
Yep.
I don't take any stimulants
Mm.
of any kind at all because it'll mess me up.
Yeah.
And I actually tried something. I tried to do 10 milligrams of Trembolone a few months back, like just pre workout. And it did give me like a boost, but
Mhm.
immediately I started having acid reflux, which I'd never had.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
that like just didn't that just wasn't happening.
yeah. One of the most common things too, and it's anyone that's eating more than a gram of protein per pound of body weight and been doing that consistently is stomach acid. It's the number one issue I would say with a lot of bodybuilders, that and they end up getting acid reflux. That's why I tell people the most important supplement you could try this too is taking the butane HCl pepsin. If you do like 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams of that, like right before each meal, that will help a lot. And then what ends up happening, and this is again good old traditional medicine, if you went to your doctor, the first thing they're going to give you is a PPI, which is something like omeprazole, Nexium, and that will for the day temporarily relieve those symptoms. However, that's actually making the issue even worse. And the whole thing with the PPIs are designed to keep people on them for the rest of their life. And that's how that's how traditional medicine is set up, unfortunately.
Well, I take a digestive enzyme called digestive gold,
Oh, that one's good, yes.
and
It
I take it with my main protein, actually my main meals, and that
mhm,
has made a drastic difference.
yeah.
And over the last year, I've added in more probiotics, and that's made a huge difference as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Try to add in though additionally the butane HCl pepsin. When we get off, I'll text it to you. And with like the with like Crohn's or colitis, you can do heavy amounts of like glutamine and soluble forms of butyrate that pretty much just help the mucosal lining of the gut and repair it. But you can treat a lot of this stuff yourself without, becoming a victim to this traditional medicine bullshit.
Well, like I said, the doctors have not done anything for me.
Yeah.
I had to figure out, I don't eat any gluten, I don't eat dairy.
Yeah.
I eat a pretty bland diet. Well, I season it, but chicken and rice, and that's pretty much what I eat.
Yeah. Alcohol is also really bad for it too.
I've never been a drinker, so that's
So
not an issue for
that's
me.
good.
It's never been a thing for me. I don't really drink alcohol, so that's not a problem. But yeah, no stimulants at all because stimulants will mess me up. Too much caffeine
Absolutely. Those are the
messes me
main
up.
things.
And I found I'm able to train just as intense as ever without that.
Mhm.
I don't really need I use a pump pre-workout, which is non-stim, and that's
Yeah,
it.
that's cool. Definitely, yeah. So, but yeah, if you need anything with that, like let me know. But it is something that you can manage, and you can manage it better with doing things like different digestive enzymes and stuff that support your gut health for sure.
So let's talk a little bit about, a lot of people, want to know like what do the pros really do? And there's different things being thrown out there by different people, the one guy I'm sure you're going to know what I'm talking about. He's talking about taking 20 units of growth hormone a day, and he's taking, 5-6 grams of gear of different kinds at one time. And he has a whole YouTube channel and devoted to all this. And honestly, he's not that impressive,
No.
like his physique at all. I mean, yeah, the guy gets 260 pounds, but he's 260 pounds of fat and water mostly.
Yeah,
And taking
exactly.
all of this stuff and it's like, and he claims that his blood work is impeccable, which I can't believe that.
Well, like I will tell you one thing, Larry, like when we refer to the word genetics, genetics also refers to more than just say, who has a small waist and good lat to waist ratio. It also does refer to how well an individual can metabolize and respond to these drugs. And I will tell you, which I have been surprised by this. I've had some people that were, you know, either top open Olympia competitors or top open Olympia potential that had been, or even amateurs that were abusing steroids for years. That when I would see some of their blood work, in the beginning, I would be like, "Oh, this guy's health markers are going to be wrecked." And then, to my surprise, they actually like weren't. But I've seen the flip side too, where you have someone that does moderate doses and their bodies just metabolize these drugs differently and a lot of their health markers will take a hit. So again, like it's really, which it sucks that it is like this, but it is really based upon the individual. But people just shouldn't think either, because you go and you get your basic blood work done, that you're potentially not having like any health risk, because you can still be creating damage even with good optimal like blood work, unless you're going for things like if you go for an angiogram and different ultrasounds and stuff like that's different. And I usually do I send everyone for a calcium score because that's super basic. But like an angiogram, I would send someone for an angiogram if they had like a high calcium score. But again, it's really based upon like the individuals. There is a possibility his blood work could still be somewhat okay. Um, but again, like event that doesn't mean that eventually it won't be, because that's the scary part about our industry. A lot of times these health issues that are happening are health issues that someone's not going to see necessarily like short term. This is something that is going to end up like where someone that was competing hard in their 20s, 30s and into their mid 40s, it's usually some sort of issues that they'll start to see like in their later 50s, that they can end up having a heart attack in their mid to late 50s that they would have never had because of the stuff that they were doing 10 years ago.
Well, I actually just had my calcium CT score done last year, and it was 800. So
Okay.
from there, we went and got the MRI. First, I
Okay.
got ultrasound and then an MRI where they could see. And luckily, all the plaque buildup for me is
It's on the outside.
on the
Good.
outside of my arteries. I had nothing on the inside.
That's great. And I
Which
tell
is
people this too, because sometimes people freak out. I had a patient recently that had over a 1200 calcium score. And like at first he freaked out. He eventually got the angiogram, but man, for him to get that test done, it was like pulling teeth. And that's why the whole thing with the insurance company and traditional medicine is it's terrible that it's like that. He did get the angiogram, and luckily we found out that he didn't have any significant major like blockages. And then when I started really looking at what he was doing, believe it or not, this guy's case, what ended up causing this, he was on accident taking too much vitamin D3 and wasn't taking enough vitamin K2, and it ended up that's what ended up jacking up his calcium score. So but yeah, you did the right thing. You go for the calcium score, and then if that comes back high, then you go for more extensive testing.
I actually just did a podcast recently on a supplement that I've been using for several years. It's concentrated K, and I actually carry that on my
Yeah, oh
website.
yeah,
And
it's super important.
it's a super high dosage of vitamin K. And if you compare it to the other vitamin Ks on the market, they're not even close.
Yeah.
Like the dosage is way higher. And they have two. They have the Ultra K, which is K7 with vitamin D3,
Mhm.
5,000 units, and that's mostly for younger endurance athletes. But for the older people like me, they have the concentrated K, and which is a much higher dosage of vitamin K. And I actually recently, based on the advice of the doctor who makes the stuff, and also T and Clark, doubled my vitamin K. I was taking one dose a day, and I'm two of them a day.
Yep, there. That's 100%. That's 100% correct. And with the calcium score too, it could be the flip side too. So you get bodybuilders, and I've seen this in one case too. A guy goes, he has a good calcium score, okay, and then he thinks, oh, I'm totally in the clear. But what people don't realize, that calcium score is indicative usually of stuff that you're doing 5 or 10 years ago. The way that everything works with like soft plaque and calcium, that doesn't mean that you don't have soft plaque that's building up in your arteries. So again, like I had someone that actually ended up having severe cardiovascular issues with a perfect calcium score, and it was related to soft plaque because they got a calcium score and thought, hey, I'm good. Continue to keep doing what they were doing, and they didn't realize though that they had I think it was like a 87 or 90% blockage that was due to like more soft plaque, that they actually needed to go for the angiogram to do that. So like, a lot of people don't realize that either.
So let's talk about like I know everybody wants to know what do the actual pros really take.
Taking, which I can tell you, there are some that are taking like more, but I'll tell you right now, there's amateurs that are taking most of your top 10 Olympians. I'll guarantee you that there's amateurs that are taking way more than them, because the people that are top 10 at the Olympia are there because they, one, have impeccable genetics, and they've been consistent with diet and training for 10, 15 years or whatever it may be. Like, so like their protocols may vary. Yes, there are times like where they might be running higher doses of growth hormone, and there are some that may be running higher, but it's nothing like what people think, like where they're running, 7 to 10,000 grams of or whatever.
So like a person like Nick Walker, like I said, they're doing comparison photos from 2001 to 2024,
Mm.
and it almost seems like he's regressed in
So like
a little bit.
when I was working with him, which was for 10 and a half months for the whole entire 2022 season, like we stopped working together when we were in prep for the Olympia, which at first, when someone reaches out to me, again, like I tell them right off the bat, I need to make sure that this is going to be a good fit. And when he was reaching out to me, it was like right after the 2021 Olympia. And I actually advised him, I said, look, you had success with what you were doing before. Why would you change that? Like, if it's something that's a personal thing, maybe you and Matt need to sit down and have a conversation and really just kind of work those things out. And I, pressured him to kind of do that. And then when it was like at no point of no return, so he said, I told him, look, for me to even be able to consider if this is a good fit, this is what I need from you. And I sent him over an extensive list of certain blood work that's not your typical regular blood work, um, and certain cardiovascular tests. And then from there, I didn't think I'd ever hear from him again. To my surprise, he got me back like 90% of everything I needed. And then I went down to Florida like in January of 2022. And that's when we had started. But I'll tell you, like at the peak of his off season, like he was at about 298 to 300 and was in very, very, very good shape. But the approach like I took with him though first, which I told him, because he asked like, look, like, should we push it hard and try to put on all this? I told him like, you don't need that much more tissue at all. And I explained to him, you know, if we can bring your waistline down, let's say an inch and a half or 2 inches, well, then we just put on about 15 pounds on your frame because it's going to create that more of an illusion.
Right.
So, like, I never had him really taking, nothing too crazy, like a basic, like, cycle for him, say in the off season would be like the highest his testosterone would maybe be like 750, 800. And that's walking it up to that point, like not starting there. It might be starting at 500 and then slowly walking it up. And then, doing something like a primobolan or a DHT derivative at anything that ranged from say 500 to 700 milligrams. And then if he used the 19 nor like an NPP, that was something usually that was no higher than 400 milligrams. And that was like peak of his off season. And then like even started the prep for the Olympia too. And it wasn't until we got into prep for the Olympia where he just started giving me more resistance on things. And I love Nick as like as a person and as a friend. I really do. And that was like where I told him like if you're mentally not in a good place and not comfortable with because he wasn't a fan of doing like any sort of blood work while we were in prep. And I explained this to him and I try to explain this to everyone that you can't only do blood work when you're off of everything, because that's not applicable to your everyday life. You need to have an idea of how your body is metabolizing these drugs, and because that's the state that you're in. And there are some people that don't want to do those things and rather not like know those types of things. And with coaching, I tell people there's 100 effective ways to get you from point A to point B. And there are certain things that can be kind of discussed and altered between the coach and the client that you can meet halfway. But with like certain things with like health, when it comes to me, there are things that are just completely non-negotiable, and that I won't sit back
Well,
and
I
be
won't
like,
if someone doesn't do blood work, I won't prep them, period.
yeah,
I
oh,
won't even work
absolutely
I
not,
won't even work with them as a training client unless they're natural.
no.
If
And
they're taking anything, they need blood work.
yeah,
That's like the first thing I tell them is, "You go get blood work," and I send them for testing instantly.
yeah. And his genetics, I'll tell you, like with his genetics, he would be that size regardless whether if he was doing a total of 1,200 milligrams or 1,000 milligrams of total hormones in a week, or if he was doing 4,000, he still would be. He puts tissue on like very, very easily. But I will say too that he is very, very consistent when it comes to like there isn't really much balance with him. He doesn't miss meals. Like he can count on one hand, put it this way, how many meals he's probably missed in the last 5 years. And I tell anybody this, and I'll bet them any amount of money that if you can go 6 months without missing one meal and you're consistently getting stronger and performing better in the gym each month, I promise you that that will be the most powerful drug or powerful variable you've ever experienced in your life far beyond any drug that you've ever taken.
So why do you think it seems like he kind of regressed, especially
So
last year?
So I did speak to him like a little bit after like when some things were going on, and I talked to him, and I can see some of the things that I thought that was going on, that he was taking things that he didn't need to, whether it be like metformin and not checking like his blood work. And I just think that what happened was like with him and Matt's situation, Matt was obviously at one point capable of getting him in shape, which to get someone in shape, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. It's pretty easy at the end of the day. However, at that point in like where Matt's life was, from what it appeared to me and what I seen, he had a lot going on where, more than half of being a good prep coach is giving a shit enough where you're going to pay attention to the person's body and actually care to put the time in to coach them the right way. And Nick's body didn't get like that overnight, where he did end up losing, in my opinion, a significant amount of muscle in this last prep. And this didn't start at 5 weeks out. This started at 12 weeks out. By 10 weeks out, you could see it clear as day in his photos that he was losing all that freaking wow factor that makes his physique impressive. So, I don't think that Matt was really paying attention to certain variables. Like I tell people, like if you pay close enough attention to the body, as soon as his body started responding that way, like they should have jumped on it right away, sent him for blood work. And then once he got his blood work back, you can see certain things in his blood work that indicated that, like, if you're taking metformin and it's tanking your IGF on the floor, that eventually is going to end up, affecting you, that and blunting mTOR. So over that course of those weeks and months, that's what was ending up happening. But instead of Matt like taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture of what was going on, the approach is just keep hitting the gas harder, more cardio, add this, add that in. And at that point, then it just continued to start a downhill spiral. And then, Nick eats, lives, and breathes bodybuilding. So at that point, like it's putting Nick not in a good mental place. And I'll tell you one thing about Nick, he has to be in a good mental place. And it just, started this domino effect. And, I did feel bad for him. I did, but at the end of the day, I told him straight up, like, dude, like you've seen this was happening to you earlier. Like you don't let you didn't do this even with me, but you don't let the coach, you have to speak your mind too. It's your body. The coach is the co-pilot guiding you in the right direction. Um, and that's really what it boils down to at the end of the day. And then the guy he's working with now is actually a really close friend of mine, Kyle Wilkes, and he's been a friend of Nick's over the years and a really good friend of mine too. And I know wholeheartedly that Kyle does care about Nick like as a person. I could say that confidently, the same way that I did. And I told Nick off the bat, I said, yes, your goal is for you to win the Olympia. But at the end of the day, like my top priority is to look out for your overall well-being. And, I know that Kyle will do that as well.
Well, I think what another thing a lot of people don't realize is it's not just what you're taking during a particular cycle or prep, but things happen over time and
Absolutely.
health erodes over time. There's a particular female competitor that you and I both know, and the last 2 years she's had problems at both competitions with her stomach distended. And I told her you're insulin resistant, and she doesn't take like a huge amount of growth hormone or anything, but she's been taking growth hormone consistently for years and years and years.
Yes.
And now I did that to myself, actually. I wasn't insulin resistant until I want to say I really noticed it probably in the last 3 or 4 years. And I've never taken, high dosages of GH or really anything, but I have consistently taken GH for probably the last 20 years. And I take 2 units pre-workout 4 days a week and 1 unit at night on those same days. So 3 units total 4 days a week. and that made me insulin resistant. I am
Wow.
insulin resistant from that, and I
I'm
have to
actually
take
I'm surprised because you were taking days off from it. Does pre-diabetes run in your family?
no, and I had no indication of that prior in my life before. But I do have to take a Basaglar, which is like Lantus, at
Hmm.
10 units twice a day just to keep my digestion going normally. Because without it, I don't digest my food well.
So what you would look at, Larry, hold on 1 second because I think my dog is eating a glass right here. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So what you would also, in your case, Larry, what you would want to look at, you would want to see if the problem is stemming from your pancreas. So I would look at your insulin levels too. So like another health consult I did a week ago, a guy was like, "Oh, look, I'm not insulin resistant. My A1C is 5.5, but his fasting insulin was like 35. So like the fact that his pancreas is producing that much insulin and his A1C is like still technically in reference range, but it's borderline. That does still mean that you are insulin. In your case, you potentially could have like down regulated your pancreas where the issues happening in the pancreas where that's not producing enough insulin. Like,
Well,
and
I'll tell
the
you, my A1C got higher about a year and a half ago. It was starting to run higher A1Cs, and I added in the basal insulin, and now my A1C is normal levels. Um, but
and
that was just to get.
how much Lantus are you doing? Are you doing it just in the morning, or are you splitting it in the morning and at
I
night?
split it 10 in the morning and 10 at night. I originally tried doing it 20 in the morning, and then
Yeah,
I realized that it doesn't work as long as people say. It's not really 24 hours. So I do 10 in the morning, 10 at night.
yeah. So you definitely always have to split it for sure. 10 in the morning.
And I noticed for myself, because of the Crohn's, like the GH and insulin has a major impact on the Crohn's.
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
if I take GH and I don't take the insulin, I will get a flare up
Yes.
and I won't be digesting my food well.
Mhm.
And I mean, this is like literally right away. Like I can take GH and I don't take insulin, and within an hour, I'm shitting my brains out.
Yeah.
But I take the insulin and that problem doesn't happen.
Yeah. So like what I would do if you want to, you can send me your blood work and I can take a I'm more than happy to take a look at it. But a little test that you can do, and I've done this for people say that don't have health insurance, so that you can get a perspective of what your actual beta cells are doing, like the function of your pancreas. You can go ahead and get something called like glipizide, and it's a medication that's for type 2 diabetics. And the best way I could describe it is it forces the pancreas to secrete insulin. It's almost like taking insulin because when you take it, if you take even a low dose of it, it can and will make you go hypo if your beta cells and your pancreas is functioning okay, because it forces the pancreas to secrete insulin. So like what you could do is if you do a low take just one pill of that, if you notice that that didn't drive your blood glucose down, then you would definitely want to go do further testing because that could mean that you're a type 1 diabetic. But if you take that and it pushes your blood glucose down, then that means that you are that your body is able to produce secrete insulin on its own. um, I would definitely give that a shot. And how long have you been on the long acting insulin for?
I want to say about, well, I had taken insulin on and off for years,
Hmm.
but since my A1C went high and I started the Basaglar, which is the same as Lantus,
Yeah, same thing.
I would say it's been about a year.
Okay, like and the good thing too, which is a lot of times like when people, let's say they're frying out their pancreas and their insulin production, their pancreas isn't producing enough insulin. One of the ways that you can upregulate your natural production is like doing what you're doing is utilizing a long acting insulin, because what you're doing right now is you're giving your pancreas a break so it doesn't have to secrete as much insulin, and it has an opportunity to upregulate. So like I would definitely be anxious to see what your pancreas is doing right now on its own. And a lot of times how these things happen from taking GH to is what ends up happening is it affects the liver first, where people end up having like things like fatty liver, and then that ends up translating over and then affecting like the pancreas. I don't know if you ever had any issues with your liver before all of this
My
started
liver
happening.
enzymes have always been high for like on all my blood work for going back 25 years.
When you say high, is it like over 100?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I
And
would
and I've
definitely
had ultrasounds on my liver. I've had biopsies on my liver.
you
They
have
haven't been, yeah, they haven't been able to find anything. My liver enzymes are always high.
no like visceral fat around or on the liver.
Recently, they said that I had a bit of fatty liver, but
Okay,
they haven't been able to find any like damage or anything doing the ultrasounds or other tests.
so the fatty liver is actually what is most likely causing a lot of it, and there is like a lot of effective ways that you can actually get rid of it. um but you would want to identify too if you have something called like hepatic insulin resistance, which when you take the Lantus, though, you said it keeps your blood glucose perfect, right?
Yep.
Okay, so that's good, because people that have really bad called hepatic insulin resistance, those people can actually do insulin and it doesn't have like the response that you would think that it would if it's really really bad. So that's good. But yeah, no, like when we get off this call, I'll give you some information. It's like I specialize in helping a lot of people just like with what you're dealing with.
So, like with Nick, my theory is I believe that over time,
Yeah,
he's made himself insulin resistant. And it's not something he could be taking the exact same thing he did 4 years ago. And it doesn't happen. It doesn't
exactly.
happen like overnight or during a prep or right away. It's just over time. It's a condition that
Yeah.
kind of creeps up on you. But once you have it, it's really hard to re- reverse that situation.
So the part that you said that's 100% on the money, and competitors nowadays don't understand this. You're 100% right that these imbalances that happen and issues with your health are from things that you've just been doing over the years. And these guys are so stubborn that they're like, well, this is what I did and this is what it worked. Yeah, but you're not understanding like these things that you're doing wrong. You're not going to typically see anything short term. They're going to end up affecting you later where they're not working the same way anymore. In
Right.
Nick's case, just because I know his situation a little bit more like in depth, he actually like for like a good 4 months or so didn't use any growth hormone. He wasn't when he was in his Olympia prep. He wasn't insulin resistant. He was just again creating these imbalances of doing things like blunting mTOR and IGF, which that was causing him to like lose muscle. And then I don't know how big his waistline is right now, but some of the stuff that we did during recomp phases and whatnot did help bring down some of the systemic inflammation to keep his waistline a little smaller, which that could easily be destroyed if you don't do things a certain way. um and then these different things start to happen. But he without a doubt had a 4 to 5 month time span where he was losing a significant amount of muscle. I would say probably at least 15 pounds of close to stage tissue. And he couldn't have went on stage looking like that. That wouldn't have been. I think that they made the right call in that regard.
Right.
That
Yeah.
not
If he
putting
went
him
on
on.
Olympia looking like New York, he would have got blown out of the water.
But Larry, he wouldn't have even looked. It wasn't New York. It wasn't even close to New
Right.
York.
Well, like the
They made the
female
right.
competitor that I was telling you about, she told me like for her last prep that she didn't take GH for the last month. I'm like, that doesn't matter. You
Yeah.
created this condition over years.
Yeah.
You don't just pull the GH and now that all of a sudden it's magically gone.
Yeah.
You created this over many years of taking growth hormone
Yeah.
consistently.
I mean, the way to tell really is that you would want to send her for to test certain health markers. Yeah. But you're 100% right. It could be something like, it could be, insulin, it could be insulin resistance. I don't know if she's having like GI issues. It could be a gut health thing, because if she
Well, it's
was
just
in,
that every time she tries to carb load for the show that her stomach distends because she can't digest the carbs.
and yeah, like if she's someone too that was in prep for a while, or had to like go into like a heavy deficit too, what ends up also happening is you kill off all your good bacteria in your gut, because if when you're eating so low carbs, you're cutting out a lot of essential like prebiotics, probiotics that we're getting from our food. Well, when you completely eliminate, fiber, like types of fiber and nutrients that's in food, you wreck your commensal bacteria, which is your good bacteria. And then that starts a whole other laundry list of gut health issues that you end up having. And then, when you try to eat food, your body's not absorbing or processing it the right way
Mhm.
anymore.
Well, I noticed like for myself, when I first started with the high A1C, my stomach, every time I'd eat and take insulin, my stomach would get distended. I wasn't digesting my food well. Um, it just wasn't working. And now since I've been taking the probiotics and digestive enzymes and I'm taking the vascular, I don't have any stomach distension ever.
Of course. Yeah. No, because when you're like, when people ask us, and I'm sure you've got asked this question before, like after my workout, like, when should I eat my post workout meal? And like, people will say, whatever, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever it may be. But if people want to know actually like scientifically the correct answer to that question, it's really however long it takes for your blood sugar really to drop back down like below 100. And that's really where you're going to be in a more optimal place for nutrition partitioning, where the nutrients is actually going to be absorbed into the cell.
Well, for me personally, I found that training is like a game changer as far as
Oh yeah,
digesting my food.
of
Um,
course.
I eat my biggest meal of the day is post workout, and I have
Yeah.
no problem digesting it and eating more food because my body is sucking up all the stuff
Yep.
um, automatically. But I
Definitely.
also pre workout, I take 2 units of GH and 5 units of fast acting insulin, the Humalog. And then I take an intra workout drink, which is aminos and creatine and glutamine and uh, the cyclic dextrins, and I just sip on that intra during my workouts. And then after my workout, I have a protein shake with rice milk. And then literally within an hour after that, I'm eating my biggest meal. And the reason it's my biggest meal is because honestly, I'm just not that hungry to eat that much food, earlier in the day prior to training. But after training, I can digest that and absorb it because my metabolism is like going fast, and I can digest just food a lot better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's why like appetite is another marker that I like to track pretty closely. And, like when people are like, "Oh, I'm not hungry, I'm forcing this food down." That's not a good thing. And usually like the first thing I have people do is to make sure they're not becoming insulin resistant. Because when you are insulin resistant, anyone that you talk to, if they have a high A1C, or say if their blood sugar was 150, that person's not going to be hungry. So, you want to rule that out. And it's a lot of times it's not the good approach. Like if you're not hungry, to just force feed yourself the food down. You want to make sure, again, like it boils down to more so like what are you able to absorb and digest and utilize.
Well, I mean, I'm hungry during the day. I mean, I eat breakfast and a couple meals prior to my training session.
Yeah.
But like I said, I'm able to absorb more food after training.
Yeah.
And I think it's just everything that I'm doing around the training, including doing the training, that enables me to do this.
Yeah.
Whereas if I ate that same amount of food like first thing in the morning, I'd probably be in the toilet for an hour.
Yeah. Because your cells are, are looking for glycogen, for glucose. So yeah,
Right.
like it makes perfect sense. But yeah.
Now,
Well,
what a lot of people don't understand is, and I want to emphasize this, just because you're training doesn't mean that this is going to work for you, because most people's training is bullshit. And
mhm.
what I mean by that, there's no intensity going on. When I finish a training session, I feel like I just got in a physical fight. Like my
Yeah.
whole body is hurting and my body is ready to suck up that food.
Yeah.
It's high intensity, real hard, enough not super high volume, but enough volume to where I like after I train legs, I can barely walk,
Yeah.
but I'm able to absorb food like no other. I'm not going in there and doing a pansy leg workout and then going and, you know, eating a bunch of food after that.
Yeah.
And I don't see that anymore. I haven't seen it. Honestly, I haven't seen it in since the 90s. I'm not joking. I used to go train at Gold's Venice during my contest preps during the mid 2000s and early 2000s. And Charles Glass would be in there training his clients, and they'd all stop their workouts. I'm not just bragging or anything. They'd stop. He'd be training like whoever, uh, what's his name, Dexter Jackson, and they'd stop and watch me because I'm the only one in there fucking training hard in
Yeah.
Gold's Venice. Like everybody's in there doing like going through the motions, doing this lightweight bullshit,
Yeah.
and they're not. It's just not the same.
100%. And I couldn't agree with you like more wholeheartedly. And you walk into the gym and you see all these people with tripods, and they're making, these YouTube pages before they have actually created an actual physique. And it's because they're kind of trapped into this false sense of reality, where if they put that emphasis on, which if they go and they look at even the biggest names in the sport, even Chris Bumstead or Nick, like these guys didn't have YouTube pages or anything like that until they were already top level, like at the Olympia. Then they put the emphasis on in the gym. And if you watch any of them train, like Bumstead is strong as hell. Like this guy squats 500-600 pounds for reps, goes on that pendulum squat, puts 6 or 7 plates on there. Like that's how he got to that point. And I know like Bumstead takes super small amounts of PEDs, and part of it too is I think he does have an autoimmune. I think he does have colitis and something else with like his
He
kidneys
has
too.
a different autoimmune. It's something else. It's I forgot what the name of it is, but it's not colitis or Crohn's.
But yeah, I know that he has some sort of pre-existing like autoimmune type issue. And
Mhm.
no, but he doesn't take a ton of stuff at all, and I know this for a fact. But if you look at his training is impeccable, and he's been consistently doing that for years and years and years. And I know from doing this for years, I could look at someone's body and their physique and have a good idea of how that person's trains by looking at them.
Oh
um
yeah, you see the density and just the thickness,
Absolutely.
and you're not seeing that same density and thickness like you saw in the 90s and the conditioning.
No.
You're not seeing that anymore.
Yeah, like you can tell, like even like when people refer to the word like conditioning, yes, like you could have two individuals that are 5% body fat, but when you have someone that has been doing those heavy compound movements for years and years and years, it gives the muscle a different type of like density and
Well,
hardness to it.
perfect example is Hadi Choopan. I
Perfect
mean,
example,
that
yes.
guy trains like a maniac,
Yep.
really heavy weights, drop sets, like super high intensity.
Yeah.
If you just watch his training, and this is before Henny Rambod. I mean, you
Oh
saw
yeah,
his
no, no.
videos when he first came on the scene, and he was in that kind of like shit gym with like just basic free weights,
Yep.
but he was doing front squats with I don't know how many plates he had on each side for
Yeah.
reps, and doing strip sets and doing like T-bar rows with like Ronnie Coleman style strip sets.
Yeah,
That's why he looks the way he does.
absolutely, 100%. And like I can show you anyone, even like when John Meadows was around. Of course, he didn't have a good structure by any means, but he was granite hard from his training.
And
And
I'm going to get some hate for this, but I don't care. I'm going to say it. Look at Samson Data. I know he's Mr. Olympia. I know like he's got a pretty structure and whatnot, but honestly, he doesn't have a striation in his whole body,
yeah,
and
no,
there's a reason for that.
it's true. And like again, like genetics, there are some people and there are bodybuilders. Like I know that Phil Heath, most of the last few years, he did mostly like a lot of machines, but there are some guys that are genetically gifted like that, where they do still stay round and bubbly. And
You know what though? I Everybody says Phil didn't train hard,
I don't know that because I don't personally know him.
but I
I'm
watched his
speculating.
training videos and he did regular barbell rows
Yeah.
with 315 pounds. And I know it's not
Oh yeah.
500 pounds that Ronnie Coleman did,
Oh,
but he
three
did it with
fifteen on a
perfect
barbell row.
form, holding and squeezing each rep. That's not no weight, you know.
To be doing that with perfect form. Yeah, that's heavy for sure.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, he wasn't throwing weight around like Ronnie was, but he still lifted a significant amount of weight and he trained hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe he wasn't doing Ronnie Coleman weights,
Hmm.
but he did train hard. He wasn't just like messing around in the gym.
Yeah, for sure.
Could he have trained harder? Maybe. Would it have done more? Maybe. Obviously, he had the greatest genetics, probably of almost everybody.
Hmm.
Um, but and he also, I'm sure he stuck to his diet super strict. He didn't get like that just messing around.
No, of course not. He was super consistent, like without a doubt, for sure. But that is like a variable that people really need to emphasize more on is the training for sure. It's going to be the main variable. It's going to dictate where how much tissue you're able to put on.
And there's a particular coach right now. This guy, he's a nice guy, so I don't want to put him on blast. But honestly, I did an interview on his show recently because he asked me to. And he's preaching that, the training doesn't matter. It's just the drugs.
What?
Yes, the training doesn't matter. It's just the drugs. It doesn't matter how you train, just take more drugs. And he got his pro card as a master's competitor. And be honest with you, he looks okay. He doesn't look great. He looks okay. And, he's like, the training doesn't matter. It's just the drugs.
I can assure you that's not true.
Well,
Yeah.
but there's a reason why he's selling this program. And I'll tell you what it is. People don't want to train that freaking hard. So if you are want to sell your coaching program and you tell people you don't have to work that hard, you just take what I tell you and you're going to be a pro and you're going to be great, versus what I'm going to tell you is don't take a lot of drugs, but train your fucking ass off and eat really strict. What do you think most people want to do?
Of
They
course.
want the easy way.
Absolutely.
But the easy way is not going to work.
Yeah.
You're not going to get the same result. I can tell you for a fact, there was a client I had. I prepped him for nationals in 2022, and I I trained him with him in the gym up for that prep, and I worked the living shit out of him. And he placed top 10 in the nationals his first time ever. He was completely shredded, looked great, better than ever. Right after that prep, he didn't want to train with me anymore. He was just like, fuck this. I know what he was thinking. It's just too hard. I don't want to do it. So he went off and started doing his own thing. And then
Some other coach probably poached him and made all these promises that I'm going to do this and that. That's
well,
usually how
he
it
went and
works.
did his own thing for a while. And then he did get some other coach. And unbelievable. This guy's like obese, fat coach.
Yeah.
Um, and then he tried to prep himself this year. Well, no, not prep himself with that fat coach.
Mhm.
And I know what he was taking because someone told me more drugs than I had him on, like double the amount. And he looked like absolute shit. Absolute shit. Doubled his dosage, but wasn't training like we did, wasn't dieting properly, I'm sure, and he looked like shit.
Sometimes people, Larry, unfortunately, they have to learn like the hard way. And I bet at the time you were the only like coach he had at the time that he had ever worked with. And was that the case? Like it was the first time that he was working with anyone. Was that show that you guys did together?
He had done shows before. I don't know if he was working with anybody or not, but he always
Mm.
looked like crap. He
Yeah,
never could get in condition. It was the first time he ever got in condition. I mean, striations in the quads and the glutes everywhere.
yeah. Because a lot of times, like if you have someone and they've never worked with like another coach and they don't know what to expect, they'll go ahead and I've had a couple of people that are like this where turn them pro, the whole 9 yards. And, they've brought up things to me like, oh, why are we not taking this or that? And I would explain to them why. And then, even though they're having great success, they go ahead and they think that the grass is greener on the other side. And then they learn after a year or whatever that it's not. And then they'll end up usually coming back. But a lot of times, too, I've had people where I've made them actually go work with other coaches just because for them, they don't understand like the value that you're creating until they actually see how things really are.
Well, it's not just the grass is greener on the other side. It just comes down to I don't want to work that hard.
Yeah.
I've had many. I can tell you, I haven't had a single training partner that lasted with me more than a year in all the years I've been doing this. And
Yeah.
I most people last maybe a month and then they just bail.
Yeah. That's the main thing, consistency.
Yeah, they don't want to work that hard. And for me, it's like I started training like that back in the 80s, and it's just the way I do it. But
Yeah. I mean,
I don't see that in the gyms anymore
no, I mean,
at
I'm
all.
cut from the same cloth. The guy that got me into bodybuilding is a really good, he's like a family member to me, is Jerry Scalisi. I don't know. He was a top bodybuilder in the early like 80s.
Yeah,
He's
I
good
know who he
friends
is.
with Chris. He got me. I wrestled at a pretty elite level in high school and then going into college. And once I stopped wrestling, I needed something to keep me going. And he got me into bodybuilding, and that's like the cloth that I was cut under. And I know like what he looked like, and he didn't do crazy doses when he was competing, and he looked incredible. And I seen firsthand how important the training is, and it's something that unfortunately not enough people are overlooking.
So I think we covered quite a bit.
Definitely,
I'd
yeah.
love to have you on again. I'm sure we could keep going all day long.
Oh, of course,
But
yeah. I could talk a
we're
lot.
right at about the hour and a half, 2 hour mark right now.
Yeah.
Anything you want to promote or add?
Um, no, I mean, my really mission statement is, to show people that they can compete at the most elite levels without having it be detrimental to their health or negatively impacting other areas of their life. An area we didn't even get into, but I could literally go on and on about this, is with women. The stuff that I see like people doing, it completely mind blowing. But that's another thing too, that what a guy does compared to what a female does is, you know, it's entirely different. Their endocrine system's totally different. So for like women too, knowing, to make sure that they're smart about doing certain things, and that, prep coaches that are working with women, even with my experience working, indirectly in the medical field for years, I still take continuing education, every year to learn more things on different topics. And everybody should do that because we're in an area that's constantly evolving, that we can continue to get better as, technology develops and over time. Like, so people should always invest the time into that.
I got to be honest with you. When it comes to the women, I've seen some of the cycles that some of these coaches have people on, and
Oh yeah.
they're dude cycles.
Oh
They're
yeah.
taking the same shit as a dude.
I
I
know.
mean, trembolone, testosterone, everything like high androgens,
Yeah.
and on most of them it shows. You can see it. And it's not a I know that, they want to win and whatnot, but honestly, it's not a good look.
No,
Yeah.
and it's something too that most women, they're going to really regret as they get older. And these side effects usually come in certain orders. Like the first thing, like is like their clitoris will start to get enlarged and their vocal cords are getting thicker, and then you start getting into more serious um, side effects that end up, you know, coming about. And then at the time they're not really paying much mind to it, but down the road, then it's something that they end up really regretting.
Well, their faces, like, they look like they got a clown mask on.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. It's just like you don't look
No.
like a female anymore. You don't even look like a dude. You look like a clown mask.
Yeah.
And
No.
yeah, I think, I don't think it's necessary for them
It,
to do that.
it's not. It's not necessary, and it's not worth it either. There are ways, and there are things that are safer for them to use, but again, too, it's also really broken down on the individual, and that's why you want to look at their hormones, see what their estradiol to their progesterone ratios are at. And that's the stuff that, like, I do at the clinic with Dr. Pierce and our other practitioners there. And yeah, it's a totally different ball game though when it comes to women.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. And
Absolutely, Larry. Thank you for having me, man. And like, let's definitely keep in touch. If I come out to California soon, I'll let you know, and vice versa.
yeah, I'll definitely make a trip out there, and I'm going to send you that blood work just so you can take a look.
Oh, of course, my pleasure. Anything you need, let me know.
So there's Larry Pollock from undergroundperformancegym.com. Don't forget, we right now have some New Year's sales going on our website, undergroundperformancegym.com. You can go on there. We've got the HD Muscle, Chemex, all those are on sale, 20% off. And that's a wrap.
All right. Thanks, Larry.
The bird in the hand. Do you